I'm ready to go, baby girl.
Okay. Okay. Greetings and welcome to Ill Repute, the podcast about women and women first. I'm Sovereign Sire, a writer, a comedian, and an agony aunt.
An agony aunt? What exactly is an agony aunt?
They're kind of like what they call in England, like a Dear Abby kind of thing. Like a kind of someone you write into your problems and they like give you advice. They're like an agony aunt.
I love that.
Yeah.
Well, I'm Ella Darling, a former librarian, a VR pioneer, an adult film performer, intermittently, erstwhile, whatever, and an absolutely mediocre and beginner climber. I mention this because I just got back from a climbing gym where I now have a recurring membership and I have all of my own gear. I got this really cute red harness and really cute dark red shoes and a little chalk bag that looks like a mummy, and it's all fucking awesome and stylish as fuck, cute as fuck, and loving it. So, bad climber, great style.
Well, you know what they say, every person that died on Mount Everest was once someone that was very focused and motivated.
So, here at Ill Repute, we support women's rights.
But more importantly, we support women's wrongs. So Ella, let's continue righting the wrongs of women in literature and the public discourse that surrounds it. I just want to take a moment. Misery Lit Part 1 really blew up. So It seems that y'all are really enjoying these stories. So we are here with our final installment of Misery Lit. But I have gotten a lot of feedback in the comments on TikTok, and multiple people were asking about Go Ask Alice. And I said that it is definitely something that we are planning on devoting an entire episode to. So
yes,
just to let you guys know that this is the end of the series, but there will probably be more literary frauds, etc. We'll probably just give them their full episodes.
Yeah. So after I started writing about Misery Lit, I actually removed Go Ask Alice from the list of books that I wanted to discuss simply because the writer is so interesting and kind of a little bit wild that I just thought she deserved her own discussion.
On a similar vein, I'm going to tease a little bit, but I am working on a script about one Miss V.C. Andrews.
Oh my goodness, that is going to be a good one.
Yes, it's going to be very fun. So just put that little feather in your cap, y'all. That is also in the pipeline. And while it's not Misery Lit, it is very adjacent. As I was reading through this script, it just kept making me think of V.C. Andrews. And I was like, I don't know much about her. And then I started reading and I was like, oh, this will be very fun.
Yeah, it's polarizing.
Yeah. Do you know much about her?
A little bit here and there, but I'm actually really excited to hear your entire breakdown because I've been looking for a source like you to help me understand the nuances of it. So I'm so glad I get to be your co-host.
Yeah. So V.C. Andrews, Flowers in the Attic, that whole series, like it's going to get some fun treatment. It's going to get the Ill Repute treatment.
We'll start by discussing Misha de Fonseca's 1997 memoir, Misha, a memoir of the Holocaust years, which told the extraordinary tale of Misha's survival as a Jewish child wandering through Europe during the Holocaust after her parents were deported by the Nazis. According to her account, after walking thousands of miles in search of her family, she was adopted by a pack of wolves in the woods. Her book became an international bestseller, translated into 18 languages, and was also adapted into a feature film in France titled
Se vivre avec la loup.
Thank you.
I'm already incredulous. One of my, and we will be talking about this in a future episode, one of my obsessions is feral children.
Oh.
I'm going to roll with it. It's not impossible, but it's That is pretty. I mean, I'm not saying the Holocaust didn't happen, but what I am saying is that the documented history of wild animals actually taking in feral children is very scant. Very, very scant. It's almost always been debunked.
Your credulity in this instance is optimistic and generous.
Doubts about the veracity of Di Fonseca's story emerged over time, but the definitive exposure came in 2008. Oh, wow. So it took 10 years. It took 10 years for there to be like a definitive. That's
For people to actually run with this child, this woman was actually raised by wolves. I remember from my youth the being raised by wolves as a sort of trope. And I wonder if it was this story that sort of started that whole trope.
There have been a few, and then especially in history, there have been a few talking like in the 1700s. So there's like documentation of a few feral children that not necessarily were raised by wolves, but kind of became part of a pack, like maybe following around a pack to get food and being accepted into the pack. But it goes back even further in history to the founding of Rome, right? The two brothers, Romulus and Remus, and that supposedly that they were nursed by a wolf. Obviously, that's like mythology, but the idea of it has been around since we've been telling stories.
That's fascinating.
So there is something there for sure.
That's awesome.
As one article put it, it was discovered that in 1943, Di Fonseca was actually enrolled in a school in Belgium rather than living with wolves.
So that's a little different.
Yeah. Yeah.
It took 10 years to look up school records.
Okay, 2008. Okay. I'm spoiled because of Ancestry.com, which not only contains birth records and census records, it contains yearbooks, it contains school records, it contains various Native American censuses, it contains marriage licenses, divorces. I mean, it's all publicly available and searchable online now. 2008 probably was when all of those things finally started to go online. I forget how young the internet is.
Yeah.
Like all the time. The point when records started to actually be digitized and put on publicly accessible databases, 2008 seems about right. I guess that's plausible. It probably would have been a lot more difficult pre-2008. You would have to physically go into a hall of records and like look it up and all of that stuff, which is trouble that a lot of people aren't going to go through.
When it comes to academic records, it's a digitization process that is unique to each institution. The money they have available to actually invest in doing something like that, the resources, the knowledge, the know-how to choose a good knowledge base so that the records that you're digitizing are actually relevant going forward instead of just within the scope of your limit. There's a lot of metadata and a lot of like system stuff that you have to take into consideration.
So there is some importance to maintaining physical media. And I have a feeling that people are going to start going back to that with like actually purchasing DVDs and things like that.
Yes.
So here is the trailer for the documentary that came out about Di Fonseca.
So it's called Misha and the Wolves from 2021. Well,
I was so overwhelmed by this story. It's unbelievable.
That's correct.
Yes, indeed.
Misha is a Holocaust survivor. She's here to tell her astonishing story.
You could have heard a pin drop.
When she was only 7 years old, she walked alone through Nazi-occupied countries, across thousands of miles in search of her deported
That's
parents.
already a lot.
I
Had an amazing
thousands
twist.
of miles at 7.
Yeah.
Turn around and I see this magnificent animal. I felt no fear. It accepted me and protected me.
They look like White Walkers.
Thinking this would make a fascinating book.
No.
My agent said Disney wants this. Oprah wants this.
Well, then,
That was the jackpot. We are heading into a monster bestseller here.
She saw in my life a gold mine.
It's an untenable position to be in. A cruel exploiter of an innocent Holocaust survivor.
Ah.
They came in with a massive judgment against me.
22.5 million.
All of a sudden,
Jesus.
flash, this doesn't add up. I needed to get to the truth. I was going through old records. I had no idea what I was going to find.
I was looking at names and places and dates.
She's got the whiteboard out.
Did something. The lists of hidden children. They didn't have Misha. She didn't exist.
I wanted to know, who is this person that has ruined my life? And then came the next twist.
La question pour moi était de savoir quelle était sa véritable histoire.
How can this possibly be?
Money.
She's both
Oh, yeah.
a victim and a
Money.
villain in the story.
Yes. Capitalism.
Money. How could this happen? Money.
So
Money is how this can happen.
we're about to go over some of the players that we just heard from / saw in that preview
Trailer.
But the woman who has an American accent, I believe, is the either the publisher or like the representative from the publisher who got into a legal dispute that we will discuss shortly. And so she's the one who was like, my life was ruined over must be fucking rough.
So in 2005, DeFonseca successfully sued her publisher for around $22 million over profits and contract disputes. So 3 years later, in 2008, her ruse was revealed when her publisher's legal team worked with Holocaust survivor and researcher Evelyn Handel, among others, who found discrepancies in DeFonseca's timeline and factual inconsistencies in her story.
I think Evelyn Handel was the woman at the end who was talking about how like she couldn't find her anywhere. She's established herself as a bit of a resource and scholar with regards to verifying Holocaust descendancy and identity.
This is very much reminding me of the Buffy St. Marie Pretendian issue, where you have this traumatic event where records were lost, things were burned. I mean, people were completely dispossessed and genocided. So it also makes this a rife area for grift because there's all of these cracks in the narrative of the Holocaust that you can just wiggle into. And by cracks, I don't mean that the Holocaust didn't happen. I mean cracks as in places where there are just gaps in available records and data. And you can find those and then you can just wriggle into them like, you know, a maggot. So basically what had happened is the book's published, it's a hit, everyone wants the rights to it, and apparently DeFonseca did not get her cut. And so DeFonseca sued her publisher in 2005 saying, you owe me like $22 million. So then her publisher and the publisher's legal team start digging around for dirt on her. And the dirt that they find out is like I imagine much bigger than they thought.
It's a gold mine. They're digging for dirt and they found a mine of gold, which was $22 million given right back to them a few years later.
Yeah. So what they found out is that her real name was Monique DeWall and that her parents had been taken away by the Nazis, but they weren't Jewish. They were Roman Catholic. They were taken away because they were members of the Belgian resistance. And she did not leave home during the war, as her book claims. How it took people 10 years to figure out that a 7-year-old with no weapons and no food,
training, resources,
nothing, somehow managed to make it through densely forested terrain and then would encounter wolves that would have eaten her. Wolves kill children, not all the time, but wolves are notoriously afraid of people unless they're little people. Because a small child, like a 6 or 7-year-old, is small enough prey, they can take her down. So the likelihood that wolves would accept a child into their pack rather than attack her as a meal is crazy.
It feels like someone's projecting their love for their sweet family dog onto some, like, you know.
Wolves and bears to a lesser extent, but wolves were the primary predators on the European continent since the beginning of time. In some areas, there were bears too, but primarily it was wolves. And there's a long history of wolves attacking and dragging away babies and small children, like from villages, you know, especially in places where young kids would go out and they would be shepherds and they would be herding their, like, tending to the flock by themselves. And sometimes they would get attacked and dragged away by wolves. So it's counterintuitive to historical and cultural memory of France, Germany, Belgium. Wolves were not your friends. Wolves didn't take people in. Wolves, there was the Beast of Gévaudan.
Wolves played pretty heavily in fairy tales that came out of that region at the time, which were pretty fucking horrific and grotesque.
Like two things that a European wouldn't fuck with in the woods would be a wild boar or a wolf. Like those are the two things that were predatory towards man. Like those. So like that, that's weird.
Yeah.
But more a child traveling thousands of miles.
A 7-year-old doesn't know what a mile is, much less thousands of miles. She doesn't have a GPS tracker. I actually don't know what these metrics are based on.
Her shoes would wear through. I just remember when we were talking about Olive Oatman and her 7-year-old little sister, right? Like, and their journey was like 30 miles.
Yes.
Or like maybe it was like a couple hundred at the end of the day. And like her sister like barely survived that. And that was like being surrounded by native humans that knew like the land and knew how to extract resources from it. And it was still an incredibly difficult journey for a 7-year-old child on foot. So that's kind of crazy and it's kind of crazy that Disney and like Oprah and all of that.
Nobody batted an eye. I mean, Disney, I get. Disney's just like, could everybody hold their questions until after we get the multi-million-dollar franchise out of our gullets. It was shocking. Nobody at this point, a hoax. And the revelation of the hoax sparked outrage. The whole thing was seen as really disrespectful to everybody who suffered and perished or even survived the Holocaust because it trivialized their entire experience, all of their memories, and everything they went through for this one individual's financial gain. The broader literary and publishing communities also, once again, faced scrutiny regarding the vetting processes for memoirs and true stories. The public and critical reception was one of betrayal and outrage. The fabrication not only disrespected memories of actual survivors, but fed into Holocaust denial rhetoric by undermining the authenticity of survivor accounts, which to me is a huge, huge problem given the world we live in today, which wasn't the one that she was living in when she published this, but that holdover, that long-term impact is, I think, pretty rough. In 2014, a Massachusetts court ordered De Fonseca to return the $22 million she received in her previous lawsuit against her publisher.
I think this is probably the only case that we profile where the fraud, even indirectly, came before a court and that someone had to suffer a consequence.
I think it's because she was suing for projected earnings. Basically, she was saying that they didn't do their part in promoting her work overseas and that she wasn't paid for some of the overseas publications. A lot of granular financial woes, which would make perfect sense if she wasn't in such a rough position to have her entire palace crumble around her.
It's really funny to me. So 2008, J.T. Leroy was exposed in 2006, correct?
Yeah, this was, I tried to choose people who were from the same general cohort of literary fraud. And yes, that was very, not 2000, yeah, around 2007, 2008 would have been J.T. Leroy. Yeah.
Yeah. So this would have been like kind of almost a trend where, surprise, surprise, these really outlandish misery memoirs. So Misha DiFonseca, aka Monique DeWall, publicly admitted that her story was not true and issued an apology stating she never intended to cause harm. From a translated article from the Belgian newspaper Le Soir in 2008, quote, "Yes, my name is Monique DeWall, but since I was 4 years old, I have wanted to forget it. My parents were arrested when I was 4 years old. I was taken in by my grandfather, Ernest DeWall, then by my uncle, Maurice DeWall. They called me the traitor's daughter because my father was suspected of having spoken under torture at the Saint-Guy prison. Apart from my grandfather, I hated those who welcomed me. They treated me badly. I felt different. It's true that I've always felt Jewish, and later in my life, I was able to reconcile with myself by being welcomed by this community." This is just so much like pretendian kind of stuff. I've always felt native. I'm welcomed. I've been adopted into this family. It's giving pretendian. It's giving like white savior adjacent kind kind
Yeah,
of.
absolutely. Absolutely. Like,
And
what
it's given
exactly
stolen
is
valor.
it?
It's giving stolen valor.
Because what
giving
is
stolen
it,
valor.
Monique? What is it about the Jewish experience that you feel so connected to, having never lived and experienced it firsthand? Like, what is it that speaks to you so loudly? And what happens when we investigate that voice and find out what it is that's really driving you?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think also this thing of like, I didn't think it was doing any harm. And I think that is this kind of entitlement, this belief that you understand innately an experience that you cannot have access to.
Mhm.
And I think I said this in the previous episode, when you've been abused or neglected or traumatized, it makes it really hard for you to do things like sit down and write a book.
Mhm.
And so having someone pretend to have that experience that doesn't have all that trauma, that can easily sit down and write a book, gets to tell the story of a person that actually exists. And the story we're getting is a normal person's fantasy of what it's
Yeah.
like to suffer.
Yes.
Right.
Yes. Absolutely. Absolutely.
And so it actively actually misinforms an audience.
Right. I think
Right.
that in the mind of somebody who says, well, it doesn't really matter, because I think what they're thinking is, well, there's so many voices authentic in the space already. What's one more voice who's the same, but maybe better? Because they think of themselves as better because they think they're speaking on behalf of a community that isn't capable of speaking for themselves or won't be listened to because of this, that, or the other. So in their mind, what they're doing is actually a good thing. And what they're doing is an elevation of other people.
Right.
And this is where I always come back to in sex work, which is that there's savior organizations for sex workers who claim that they infantilize us, basically. They make all kinds of like claims and assertions about our abilities, our mental wellness, all kinds of things. And they assert that somebody needs to speak for us because we can't speak for ourselves. And the way you help a silent minority is not by speaking for them, it's by elevating their voices to speak for themselves. And this is something that I think is a pretty easy thing to reach to. Like, well, I only made this up because nobody would listen to these people if not for me.
I mean, it also has to do with money. And if, you are, as a writer, you are somewhat beholden to whatever market trends are happening in publishing, because she could have written this story as fiction and it would have been a great, fun novel. But at that time, in the early 2000s, memoir was hot. So if you wanted something that was going to sell, it had to be memoir. Memoir was what was hot. But even now, the books that really blow up now are still memoir. And that has to do with like audiences are just more compelled and engaged with true stories where the author is a character that lives and breathes, that they can meet and interact with and get a signature from and ask questions of, which are things you can't interrogate a character from a fictional novel. There's a level of engagement in terms of the audience. And so to a degree as a writer, like the reason I pursued screenwriting instead of a career in fiction is because I didn't want to write nonfiction about my life. It is very hard to sell fiction, literary fiction. If you're doing genre fiction, that's a whole different ball game. But if you're doing literary fiction, like it's really hard. I don't approve, but I understand the market pressures that were on and continue to remain on writers that are just trying to get published. So reflecting on Manon's article about literary hoaxes, he notes about the literature professor's defense, quote, placing social value on concepts like authenticity is an invitation to manufacture them. A certain style of writing can come across as more authentic, and this can help a book gain status in the literary marketplace. So basically what I just said, it's like you can't ignore market pressure. And I think publishing doesn't want to take responsibility for that. That they have essentially like created the very problem that now plagues them because by making it so hard for fiction to pass and by pressuring people to create authentic memoir, they've created a scenario in which this is bound to happen.
It brings up a point of conversation, which is why is authenticity so important to us as consumers, and when did this start? And just hearing you speak over the past few minutes makes me kind of inclined to feel like this need to feel like the people we put on a pedestal are speaking over to us instead of speaking down to us. I think arose when the seeds were planted in early YouTube days when people still had like built parasocial relationships with content creators, but because it was YouTube and YouTube was not as prestigious as the silver screen or TV or whatever. For a long time, you had these people who became celebrities outright in their own space on YouTube through a lens that was like, oh, but it's just YouTube. It's not like the real stuff. And now YouTubers make more than some actors and actresses and huge TV shows and films and everything. But I think if I have to look back, that's what I would point to. What do you think?
Yeah. I think things like daytime talk shows, when daytime talk shows started to overtake soap operas. I would say that I'm not an American studies professor, but if I was freeballing it, I would think that around the time that you started to have those early talk shows, Geraldo Rivera, Sally Jessy Raphael, Donahue, Jenny Jones, like Montel Williams, Maury Povich, like where the premium, the entertainment value of it was shock.
Yes.
And look at how these people's real lives are even more complicated and far out than the plot lines in soap operas.
Yes.
So I think that is where the audience started to get a real taste for authenticity, for reality, and a specific kind of reality. This very heightened, bizarre, dramatic, painful. You'd have Who's the Father, but you'd also have like Oprah. In Oprah's early days, she was not love and light and
she was not as highbrow as she became. No.
Oh God, no. And so you'd have people on there talking about like incestuous relationships with their parents, like all kinds of stuff, right? And I think I would say that is probably where it first started, was this shift in the audience from I don't want fantasy, like I want reality. Reality is like, it's so crazy. You know?
Right. 25 years later, I see the same shift from, these shows are popular because it turns out that sometimes the truth is stranger than fiction, and you just can't make this shit up. And then that creates a cottage industry for these strange fiction writers to create fan fiction about their own lives, those people around them, that they present as real life. And eventually that starts to be the more outlandish, more interesting, more profit driving part of the narrative that is being shared. And 25 years later, 25-ish, on Reddit now, we have so many subreddits where people are just like sharing. It's supposed to be a scenario where like, hey, I'm a person. I made this account so nobody could find my real information because everybody says that. But here's what I'm going through. Here's what's going down in my life. Here's the fucked up weird situation I'm finding myself in with my partner, with my family, at work, whatever. And a human scenario that they're seeking other people to respond to. And this became a really driving force of that community space on Reddit. And now when you read these subreddits, it's mostly just creative nonfiction by people who really want you to think that they're telling the truth. And this is something that we see time and time again, no matter what the medium, no matter how far reaching, as long as other humans are going to be an audience, people will spin a fiction that appeals to their need for fantasy fulfillment, even if that's just the need to feel vindicated through somebody else's fake story. All of this literature is a progression crawled out of the mires of Jerry Springer and Maury Povich.
Yeah. I also think that there's an element of mental illness to it, which is
absolutely
like, I think all of these people to a certain degree suffered from some kind of lack of self-esteem and a desire to seem important or for the traumas they've been through to be validated by others. And so it's like, well, it's the emotional truth. Like, I want you to validate that I felt traumatized by my childhood, even if that means I have to change around some things. I think there is also definitely an element of people that want to be someone else.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know,
absolutely.
They want, there's whatever's going on or has gone on in their lives or whatever conditions they have or shame or embarrassment or humiliation or just, fear of not being good enough as they are leads them to dream their way into a different identity. One that they think will be more evenly praised or
more compelling
or given acclaim.
Yeah. I mean, I created Ella Darling, and that's who I live under. So like, I don't feel too far off from some of this. I just didn't make up my life experiences because you can Google my butthole, so I don't have to entertain you that way. All right. Next, let's talk about our fourth and final novel for this misery lit discussion. In 2003, Nora Corey published Forbidden Love, which was in America called Honor Lost, which was her recollection of the tragic death of her best friend in Jordan, who was killed in an honor killing for falling in love with a Christian soldier. It quickly became an international bestseller. Corey presented herself as a Jordanian Catholic who had fled to Australia from Jordan to escape death threats for her activism against honor killings in Jordan. The book was praised for shedding light on the issue of honor killings in the Middle East, and Corey was lauded for her courage in bringing the story to a global audience.
And this is also like, this is very like post 9/11. So there's like a lot of kind of anti-Middle Eastern sentiment.
Very, very intense at that time. Yeah. Really, so really tough to be brown in America. Always, but especially then.
If I was a publisher, I would be like, oh, this will be a bestseller.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Corey's fall from grace began when journalists from the Sydney Morning Herald, Malcolm Knox and Caroline Overington, conducted an investigation into her background. Their findings, published in 2004, revealed that Corey had fabricated the story and much of her own past. It turned out that Corey was not living in Jordan at the time of the events described in the book, but had been living in Chicago. Further, there was no record of the honor killing she described, and many details about Jordanian culture and geography in the book were inaccurate.
So the community impact of this was pretty rough. The revelation of the hoax provoked the expected outrage, you would assume, particularly in Jordan, amongst human rights activists who work to combat honor killings. So if you were a Jordanian American citizen and you read this book, you'd probably be pretty pissed off at the way this woman who, this Chicagoan describes your culture. Critics argued that Corey's fabrications undermined genuine efforts to address honor violence and misrepresented Jordanian society and culture. The literary community and readers who had embraced forbidden love as a true and important story felt expectedly betrayed and misled.
One, it's stolen valor. So if you're doing the real work of trying to fight against honor violence, and this book comes out and completely misrepresents the nature of the problem, the culture around which this problem has sprung forth, yeah, it's completely undermining the very real and important work you're trying to do, because then it makes it seem like, oh, so all that stuff is made up, huh?
Yeah,
like, honor killings don't really happen, because like everything that's been written about it turned out to be a hoax.
I think at this time in our societal history, there were a lot of seeds being planted that would grow and germinate into unkempt hatred that still permeates our society today. And infiltrates into the bedrock of our society, breaking the foundation wherever it can find it. And that time in America, in the United States' history, was so vulnerable because of that. And to see somebody who just sees like a cash opportunity to make up, to prey upon Americans' general.
Well, it's a masturbatory fantasy. I'm going to fantasize that I'm the kind of person that would go to Jordan and do this very important advocacy work that's dangerous. It's masturbatory.
Yeah.
I'm going to fantasize that I'm the kind of person that would actually go and be involved in this kind of humanitarian aid. And then I'm going to fantasize about how my friend was killed and like I had the courage to write about it and expose it all. Like it's such a weird narcissistic jerk session.
It is so narcissistic. That's really, at the end of the day, you're taking lived trauma that is still being suffered by extant women every day, and you're claiming it, not even for your own, but for like your best friend who's a model in Canada. She goes to a different school. You haven't met her. Like you're trivializing it so deeply and so egregiously. And then in so many cases, doubling down on your lies. Evidence mounted. She faced significant public backlash. Corey continued to insist she told the truth, even when confronted with public records, which proved beyond all doubt she had spent most of her life in the United States. The Sydney Morning Herald found public records of her living in Chicago and put this to Corey in February of 2004, shortly after publication. Now, the Sydney Morning Herald did some really, really just deep, like, so you said this, if that's the case, then why the fuck about this? Like I just want to emphasize how great they really did in this piece. But she denied that she had ever lived in America. And she said that the records were planted to trick the Jordanian government into giving her travel documents to escape. So, no, here's the thing. The evidence that you found that said that I lived in Chicago, oh my God, that's so embarrassing. You found my dark secret. Haha, that was just so that the entire government of Jordan would be tricked into thinking that, I grew up taking the L.
What occurs to me is that I don't think pretendianism is going to be a problem much longer because of the amount of records that are now available online and because of the digital footprint that everyone has left behind from being on MySpace and Facebook and Twitter and Instagram and LiveJournal. Long after these things go out of being fashionable, they still exist somewhere, right? We have a digital footprint for almost our entire lives. So the idea of fabricating something like this today, I think for a lot of people, we just would know better that everyone on the internet can find everything. And I think especially in like the last 5 years with cancel culture, if you believe cancel culture exists, or call out culture or accountability cult, whatever you want to call it, right, has been essentially crowdsourced, where someone denies an allegation and then everyone on Twitter or the detectives on social media just start combing through your shit and then come back with receipts and post them and be like, actually, no, you said this here. And that wasn't happening in 2004. So I think that we'll see less and less of this kind of stuff. It's now just too easy to fact check and to go and comb through 10 years of someone's like Twitter history. You know, like it's all there for consumption, unless you've been really, really careful about just erasing every trace of yourself, which is something that really only super wealthy people can afford to do.
I've done it myself in a few very specific instances, which thank goodness I was not met with much resistance, because the people in those instances were humans who saw another human and realized that, like, oh, yeah, that actually could, damn. Did you know that you could die if that stays up? And I was like, yeah, that's why I'm asking you to please remove it. And they're like, oh, yeah, of course.
So this is from the Sydney Morning Herald article about the fraud. So she had said that her presence in Chicago, that evidence had been planted so that she could get travel documents to escape from Jordan. And this is the Sydney Morning Herald's response. Visiting the addresses, however, the Herald found members of her family, neighbors, and acquaintances who remembered Norma from her 27 years in Chicago, from age 3 to 30. Her 64-year-old mother keeps dozens of photos of the daughter who disappeared in 2000 and has not spoken to her since. Asked how she coped with living secretly, Corey once said, quote, "It is very stressful and tiring. I would not recommend it to anyone," unquote. Despite this, she continued to deny that she had an American family. Despite the photos, interviews with family and acquaintances, public records of vehicle and real estate ownership, and a U.S. marriage, she said her mother, Asma, lived in Jordan. So that's like full delusion. Like that, I mean,
she's denying 27 years of snapshots, of disposable, of Kodaks, of you know, Instax.
Yeah. So I'm only going to assume that Norma, when she made that statement, didn't know what the Sydney Herald had already found out, because you'd be surprised how much people underestimate journalists.
Norma Corey later admitted to some fabrications regarding her personal history, but maintained that the core story of Forbidden Love was based on true events. Her responses were seen by many as evasive, and she didn't offer a straightforward public apology for the deception.
So this is kind of like the Buffy St. Marie approach of like, I never lied. I never said I was adopted out of Piopod. I was adopted into it. And I never knew that birth certificate, you know, like it's this sort of like, no, it's true. It's just not the way that, meh. Yeah. Okay. So this is from the Sydney Morning Herald, again, from that article. Admitting she lied, Corey said, quote, "I had to continue to tell people I was never in Chicago only to protect the existence of my relatives. I apologize to all the readers, publishers, and agents out there for not telling them my personal full story," unquote. Corey said she had lived in Jordan for a cumulative 12 of her 34 years and did know a victim of an honor killing. Corey refused to call her book fictional because, quote, "It is true that I had a friend in Jordan and she was killed," unquote. She said that she had literary license to change the facts in her book without telling her readers. So her defense is, I had to obfuscate my personal details to protect my family because this did happen to someone I know, and to protect myself from any danger that might arise from the publishing of the book, I had to do all this stuff. But it is 100% real. I'm not going to give anyone proof of that, But because here's the thing, you can talk to a journalist anonymously. You can give a journalist evidence that they are not allowed to publish just to demonstrate to them that you are telling the truth. And that journalist is bound by a huge ethical thing. Journalists go to jail over this shit, revealing sources, etc. If she had proof, she could give that proof to these journalists just to prove to them that this was a real person, this did happen to someone, blah, 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 blah. And that doesn't mean that they would turn around and publish it. It would prove to them that she was being truthful, and then they would drop the story.
It reminds me of JT Leroy's apology, where JT Leroy was like, well, I'm so sorry if the fact that I'm 15 years older ruins it for you. Where it's like, girl, the only discrepancy was not your age. Of course, you don't owe anybody your personal full story, but you do owe people something approaching the truth if that's what you're selling to them. If you're selling an honest reflection of your lived experience, you owe them something in the neighborhood, one would argue. And I feel like they're shifting the expectation to something that is unreasonable to make their position sound more reasonable. We've got a documentary trailer about Forbidden Lies.
My name is Norma Khoury. I'm Jordanian. I had a very difficult childhood with my father, and then my best friend gets killed by her father. It was at that point that I said, no more.
We bought the book on synopsis. It was very strong, it was very powerful.
It sold between 250 and 500,000 copies around the world.
5,000 women a year are killed in this way.
So it was like a rock star. Had there been music, we would have had a mosh pit.
Well, is it a true story?
Excuse me, this is ridiculous what's written here.
This book is not the truth about life in Jordan.
If it is such a strict family, even this little bit of hair should not be showing.
I didn't write this as a tourist handbook.
This is the first great literary hoax of the 21st century.
I would write this as a tourist handbook.
She was on the run.
Having native people indigenous to the area go like, no, like this isn't. Just the fact check on the hair. Like, because it's always the little shit. It's always a little shit. Okay, I'm going to keep that.
FBI.
Her main goal in life was to make money.
I wouldn't trust her as far as I could throw her.
I will never say that this is a made-up story because it's not. I will do everything in my power to help you prove that she did exist and that she was killed.
They said her main goal in life was to make money. She's on the run from the FBI. And it's just like, well, yeah, we're like she didn't create the system, man. Like, you know what I mean? Like, money is useful for in exchange for goods and services, you know?
Yeah. Unfortunately, when you put every human being into a situation where this is all we can do to survive and thrive, we do things for money. I really like the way that the trailer highlights the voices of people from Jordan. And we're like, what? No. Yeah. What? Here's. Let me just tell you how the fuck I know she's lying. Because this, and this. Duh. Obvi. All right. Next.
Yeah. All right. I'm gonna start playing again.
Faction. Fact and fiction. That's what it is.
This witness stated that Norma was the most evil person she had ever met, and that's her best friend.
Oh, her best friend. She's the most evil person. I mean, what I really wonder, because when I posted on TikTok, the Margaret Seltzer thing, someone was like, with family like that, who needs enemies? Which was kind of the same thing that I had said in, we were talking about with Buffy, where I was just like, on, just from the point of view of a hustler, family, that's how you could tell she was middle class, because the family would turn her in, because if she was from a working class family, no one's saying it.
No.
It's sort of so that's a measure when it's like friends or family are turning you in. You must be a real piece of shit for them to not just kind of hands off and just, well, she's going to do what she's going to do. I'm just going to sit back here. I'm not going to participate, but I'm not going to turn in my family.
Support the sin, not the sinner.
There's a part of me, the hustler part of me, right? like kind of admires just the audacity.
Yes.
And because there's a part of me that sees people kind of, it's like the Emperor's New Clothes, where they're kind of making fun of publishing, where it's like they're kind of giving a black eye to the industry that has made it so difficult for them to succeed, like purely on the merits of their talent.
Yes.
And so in some ways, these are examples of writers going like, oh, like telling a good story and having talent's not good enough because you are selling misery lit and memoir. Like, I'm going to make a fool out of you.
Yes.
To prove a point. So there's a part of me that kind of appreciates all of these people on that level, because it is kind of funny. Like, well, this is what you get publishing. Like, if you make if you put the bar on top of the Empire State Building, like, guess what? You know, you're gonna.
If you craft an exploitable system, people are going to exploit it, and it is nobody's fault except the engineers of the system to begin with. Is what douchebags would say. I don't necessarily agree with that. I think that we have social contract to try not to do that shit. But, you know, in any case, reflecting back on Louis Menard's article, he would describe this as the higher truth defense. This is the argument that fabrications and exaggerations in books like these are in the service of more fully conveying, quote, what it is really like, quote, to be Guatemalan or in recovery or whatever the theme of the life story happens to be. A Million Little Pieces by James Frey tries to capture the experience of recovering from addiction. Readers don't care whether these things literally happened to James Frey because they didn't buy the book to find out about James Frey. They bought it to learn about addiction and recovery. James Frey's job as a writer is only to convey that experience. So this sort of throws it a little bit into a backspin, which is that, like, I don't give a fuck about who you are. You're not important. The story is important. And I think that my response to that is the story is only important in as long as it is authentic. Otherwise,
because if you've ever been an addict, then how can you write about the experience of addiction?
You can't.
Like, you don't know what that is. Like, no matter how many people tell you what it's like you don't know what that is.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's the height of narcissism. It's this belief that you are smarter, better, more intuitive than everyone else. That despite not having had these experiences, you have a superior empathetic imagination, and you can tell it. You can tell it even though you didn't go through it, because you just are that much more higher brained than everybody else.
And someone like this might describe themselves as a storyteller or a narrator or as, you know, a voice for the masses. But the more bloviation somebody instills behind their fabrications, the more it just seems like they're really desperate to earn a buck. Because otherwise, why would you be fighting so hard in the paint? Like, going that hard in the paint, fighting so hard to, like, just quell everyone's concerns so you can skate by.
And also, all of these authors tried to become rock stars.
That's it.
Like, they actually, everything was about them and in service of their fraud so that they could play the person they wanted to be. It was not about the writing. It was about them being a star. That should have been the dead giveaway to the publishers. When someone that has gone through all these really traumatic things is really itching to be the center of attention, that's a red flag. That's a sign to slow down and ask more questions.
This is true. And if we had enforced anonymity in Misery Lit, I think we would have somewhat more authenticity, but we would also just be redefining the methodology of hoax creators, of the people who are practicing the chicanery and jumping in to make their quick buck. I think we would just be shifting the scenario.
A really famous anonymous memoir was Primary Colors by Anonymous.
True.
That was about the Clinton presidential campaign. and the point of view from a staffer that was working on it and was very unflattering and all the things. And that person wanted to get a story out there, but did not want to be exposed. I don't know if they've since come out, but I think there have been some guesses, I think, about like who it was. But that's an example of someone doing a memoir that was fact-checked privately. Like the publishers knew who Anonymous was. The fact-checkers knew who Anonymous was and that Anonymous was telling a real story. But Anonymous was like not the star. This wasn't about being a star. It was about getting information to the public about what it's actually like to be on the ground during an election cycle. And
absolutely
just how up it is, right? So, but that's like one I can think of.
My perspective here is torn because on the one hand, in researching this script, the time I spent on the woman who wrote Go Ask Alice and a few other false narratives that were artfully constructed, it poses to me the idea that maybe at that time they were still buying into the idea of why would someone lie about this?
Yeah.
And simply opening themselves up to the, I don't know, cause you made it so easy. Well,
I wonder why someone would make that up. Why would someone lie about that? How much was the book contract? $1 million? Some questions just answer themselves, don't they?
Yeah.
Like,
exactly.
Like when they're offering these crazy advances for these stories, it seems very foolish to not consider that someone might make something up in order to win the lottery, So these controversies within Misery Lit emphasize the importance of ethical storytelling and the responsibility of authors and publishers to honor the truth of lived experiences, especially when dealing with subjects of abuse, addiction, and marginalization. They also highlight the critical need for validating and amplifying genuine voices, particularly those of women and other marginalized groups whose experiences are often sidelined or misrepresented in mainstream narratives. But what is it about these stories that are so appealing to the masses? How did these stories gain such a massive audience to disappoint in the first place? Let's break down some of the allure.
One striking aspect common to these stories is the lure of the exotic and the other, or reliance on sensationalizing the presentation of experiences that are foreign or marginal to mainstream Western audiences. Whether it's the life of a homeless, abused youth navigating America's underbelly, as with J.T. Leroy, the harrowing tales of gang violence in South Central Los Angeles, as is the case with Margaret Seltzer, the extraordinary survival of a young Jewish girl during the Holocaust, Misha Divanseka, or the tragic fate of a Jordanian woman falling victim to honor killings, as is the case with Norma Corey. These stories sell because they offer a glimpse into worlds that are dramatically different from the everyday experiences of the average reader. This othering can sometimes lead to a voyeuristic consumption of trauma, where the distance between the reader and the subject amplifies the latter's appeal.
The problem with championing stories based on this appeal is that it perpetuates stereotypes and reinforces an inaccurate understanding of cultures and communities it purports to highlight. It commodifies the suffering of marginalized groups for the consumption of a primarily Western audience, leaning into harrowing tropes that aren't rooted in truth, certainly not the author's truth, at least. The impact is cultural, potentially influencing policy, societal attitudes, and the allocation of resources or support.
For example, the publication of the book Go Ask Alice influenced the war on drugs for years to come. And the same faux author's works also contributed to the satanic panic of the 1980s. Again, I will get into this in a future episode. The more I read about this author, the more I really saw the value in approaching her story as a unique case study. I didn't realize until I researched Misery Lit how deep her personal story runs in terms of the narratives that she shared. So that is coming later.
As Louis Manon put it in The New Yorker, quote, intercultural hoaxes are aimed at readers who are curious about worlds they have had little contact with and who are, therefore, easily duped, unquote.
Another thing to consider is the exploitation of empathy and moral outrage in some of these stories. The anecdotes constructed in these memoirs are expertly crafted to exploit readers' empathy and promote moral outrage. By presenting these stories as true accounts, the authors and publishers tap into a deeper level of engagement from the audience, who see their own experiences reflected in the stories that invite earnest emotional investment. This exploitation of empathy is a powerful tool, making the revelation of fabrication feel like a personal betrayal to many readers, especially when used as a tool to process their own trauma. It also tells us that our trauma is not, perhaps, that special, that anyone can fake it, and that is uniquely demoralizing.
Absolutely. The continued publication of false narratives like these undermines the foundational trust between a writer and their audience. Over time, it can desensitize readers to real issues, creating a boy who cried wolf scenario where genuine stories of hardship might be met with skepticism or disbelief. It can also lead to misplaced efforts or support, diverting attention and resources away from real victims and causes.
These cases also highlight the complex role of authenticity and authority in the telling of personal or marginalized stories. The fabricated memoirs were given weight because they were presented as authentic first-person accounts from individuals with the authority to tell them. The industry, in its pursuit of compelling narratives, often prioritizes sensational stories that claim authenticity, sometimes at the expense of due diligence. This raises questions about whose stories are deemed worthy of attention and the criteria that gatekeepers use to make these judgments.
When fabricators assume the mantle of authenticity and authority to tell stories that are not theirs, they occupy space that could have been given to genuine voices from within those communities. This not only silences those who have lived experiences, but also reinforces the idea that certain stories are only valid or interesting when they are told by outsiders or through a sensational lens. It contributes to a cultural landscape where authenticity is undervalued and marginalized voices are further marginalized. It also undermines trauma victims. Most victims of heinous abuse were not able to go to graduate school and get terminal degrees in creative writing. By pretending to be victims, they make it look like even victims of heinous abuse with enough determination can be super successful. It misses the point of why abuse is so harmful, because it prevents people from achieving their full potential and to determine their own destiny.
The success of fabricated misery lit underscores certain problematic aspects of the publishing industry, including the prioritization of profitable plausibility over accuracy and the lack of rigorous fact-checking, as well as the ethical implications of commodifying trauma. The industry's complicity in these fabrications, whether through active encouragement or passive acceptance, suggests a need for reflection and reform in how stories of suffering and survival are solicited, vetted, and marketed.
Christopher L. Miller, author of Imposters, Literary Hoaxes and Cultural Authenticity, put it best, quote, "It is harder to see the fun in deception when the fate of the world seems to depend on resisting lies, alternative facts, and fake news," unquote.
When the logical end result of whatever it is that you are saying is a set of mistruths, which are in themselves stochastic terrorism against any community that is even adjacently involved in the work that you fabricated, that is a good sign to pump the brakes and talk to someone about what your end goals are and what your intent is. Because if you're not telling a story that advocates for the people you think you're supporting, what is it that you're doing? And I think that's the thread that a lot of people lose.
Is that partly the audience's fault for kind of demanding these kinds of narratives from people? There has to be some sort of adversity narrative. There has to be this arc where you overcame something to be in your position. Otherwise, like, you're not as credible. It's a really, and with the internet, I think to some degree that's gotten worse, and especially as being a victim has kind of become its own social currency. And so you see people, and I see it online all the time. Sometimes it feels like people are really kind of mining their experience to try to find these instances of trauma or oppression. And I don't know how constructive it is to revisit things that happened in your past and decide that they were traumatic. Like, I think you're actually injuring your own brain by doing that. But you see this tendency for people to really kind of play up anything that makes them somehow marginalized or different.
I agree with you so much. All of these things can be true.
I don't know how mad I am at that, because I feel like people are pressured to do that. Like they're pressured to have a story, you know. In Literary Hoaxes and the Ethics of Authorship by Louis Manon for The New Yorker, he concludes, literature is a game with language, and hoaxing alerts us to the fact that the rules are not written down anywhere. In the same way that someone who goes barefoot to a wedding alerts us to the fact that there are actually no regulations governing these things, those acts draw our attention to the thinness of the social fabric by tearing a little piece of it. You know, there was this chunk of time when, you know, people were exploiting that. There were no rules saying that the memoir had to be factual. Like there was a gentleman's agreement, but it, you know, like you can't be, you're thrown in jail. Like it's like, you know, the lying in a memoir is not a crime, right? It's like it's socially frowned upon, but it's not, it doesn't rise to the level of criminal grievance, right? So it really is an honor system, which is, you know, and like, because even on the TikToks that I posted about Misery Lit, there are a lot of people in the JT Leroy one going, that was performance art. Like, no, that was performance art. It's fine. So do you know what I'm saying? It's like, there's not even a consensus among the audience around whether or not it's good or bad.
All
right. That sums up Misery Lit. So that was an Ella Darling script.
Yes. Thank you so much for listening. Our sources are many and varied, and I could read them all to you, but they are listed in our show notes and on our Patreon, and also just noted throughout the episode. So thank you for listening, and we hope you enjoyed Misery Lit.
If you would like to support us, you can support us on Patreon, patreon.com/illrepute. We have one tier. It's $5 a month. Treat it like a tip jar if you enjoy the content. We do a bonus episode about once a month. We are lagging on this month because we ended up recording a very long one. So that's good news for you. It'll be out in a week or two.
We're getting to the swing of it still, you know?
We're getting that workflow going.
We're still getting our sea legs.
Yeah. But I'm treat it like a tip jar.
Yeah.
And there are little goodies here and there. Like every month or so, you get a little goodie, little bonus content, which are a lot like our regular episodes. So you're getting quality bonus content. And that is what is important to us. Our links to our socials in the show notes. And follow us on TikTok. We're getting a lot of traction there, and we would love for you to join that traction. Mm-hmm. If you do follow on TikTok, make sure to always just like and favorite the videos, because that counts as 5 likes, and it really helps push us out into the ether so that we can collect new little souls to educate them in history.
And if you're elderly and jaded and miserable like me, and you don't like videos, mention us on Reddit. If somebody's talking about podcasts, mention our podcast. Mention us on the subreddits, because I'm not allowed to, or I'll get banned.
Yeah. Or if you want to start a subreddit, hey,
go for it.
Go for it. Let us know, and we will definitely drop in and say hi.
Yeah.
So, we're working on a Discord as well for the Patreon. We got to get that sorted, but we will. It'll all get there. We're just scrappy content providers.
Yeah, we're just doing our best.
Doing our bestest. And guys, stay tuned for next week. Next couple weeks, we got some Ada Lovelace coming. We got some VC Andrews coming. Mm-hmm. So we got good stuff on the pipeline.
And all right. Sovereign, I love you very much.
I love you too.